Testing. There we go. We got it. All right, how is everybody? Good. I was thinking this week, after several times, how great electric technology is in bathrooms. Right? You got to get the soap. Then the water. And then paper towels, right? It's wonderful. All right, we are in the midst of Hebrews chapter 11. And we got down to about, we got down to about verse 13. No, let's see. Down to verse 17. Down to verse 17. So we'll do a little bit of review, but remember, this is talking about faith. And we mentioned last week several of the points that he's bringing out about faith. Who can remember one of the things we talked about as far as faith that the author talks about? What do you think about these men and women of faith? They demonstrated their faith how? By what they did, right? By their works. It's a working faith, right? We also said that faith is something that helps us to see what? The things you can't see. That's right. To see the unseen. And they were able to go through all of these acts of faith, which we'll look at even more so. But he's basically going to show them that through these acts of faith, that they were gaining God's approval, and that they were willing to, some of this is persecution, some of this is to live in a way that is less than desirable, to live as aliens, to live in tents, to live as foreigners. And they were willing to do all that. What was their motivation, according to the author here? They were looking for a city, okay? What kind of city? Better. That's the word, right? Any question about Hebrews, just say better, and that will be a pretty good chance you're going to get it right. Right? They were looking for a better city or a better country, right? And so they have this future sight that there's something better than this world. So that kind of brings us up to date as to what we were talking about. So we talked about how he starts with creation, right? Seeing the unseen. He talks about Abel and Abel's act of faith and what that accomplished and what we could learn from that. Enoch is the next one he talks about. Then Noah. Again, a lot of these they act upon God's command, even though what God is asking them to act upon, they haven't seen, right? It says Noah being warned about things he had not yet seen. And then we have the first part of Abraham. Abraham gets double billing here. And in the midst of Abraham's discussion of Abraham's faith, there's kind of this pause, this interlude. And we're going to start there. We already talked about this. But he kind of breaks with Abraham and Sarah. There we go. And then verse 13, he says, all these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth, for those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they had went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And so they're looking for a country, and God is not only going to give them a country, but he's going to give them a city. And so one of the things you'll notice about those verses is that their reward and what they're looking for, what they've seen from a distance, it's not of what kind of nature, does he say? What kind of nature is it not? Think about what kind of natures do we have? Spiritual and physical, right? Well, he says it's not a physical country, a physical city, a physical reward, because if it was, they could have just gone back to where they were. And of course, the idea is like Abraham. Abraham was asked to move to a land he had never seen, right? And you think he just did that because, well, this is a better land than where I was? Probably not, right? It wasn't even his land. It was owned by the Canaanites. So he was looking for something better, of a better nature. And that's a key to all this. All right, so let's start now with verse 17 as we go to the second billing of Abraham. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, "In Isaac your descendants shall be called." He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, which he also received him back as a type. So now we get to that story in Genesis 22 where by faith he's willing to offer up Isaac, right? And so again, he alludes a little bit here to something we often say in that story, is that Abraham did something that just seemed out of character for God, right? To ask him to sacrifice his son. It didn't seem like something that God would want him to do. And not only that, it seems out of character because not only is Isaac his son, but what's the background to the birth of Isaac and the receiving of Isaac? What's the background of all that he talks about here? He was promised, right? He was promised. He was the promised son, and he uses those terms, only begotten, right? And in verse 18, here's the promise, "In Isaac your descendants shall be called." Well, if I kill Isaac, then all that goes away. So none of this makes sense, but what? Abraham obeys. And the way it's recorded, there is no questioning, there's no what's the saying? Him and hawing, there it is. Him and hawing. There's no delay, he does it. But then verse 19, he interprets this action by Abraham in a way that's never recorded anywhere else. He kind of puts into our mind what was in the mind of Abraham. Why was his faith that led to obedience so strong? And the answer to that is he considered that even if he killed Isaac, God had the power, the authority, the ability to do what? Bring him back, raise him from the dead. Now, you ever think about how Abraham got to that point of faith?
He had been through lots of things that God had fulfilled, and he had seen it happen.
Okay.
So there was like a pattern there that he trusted him enough
Okay.
to know this was going to take place.
All right. So there definitely is this pattern of seeing God do the impossible, right? And I want to build upon that. Because if you go to Genesis 1 all the way to Genesis 22, how many resurrection stories are there? Yeah, none. We talked about this in my Lord's Supper talk, right? So hopefully we get that one right. None. There's no resurrection. There's no talk of resurrection. So the question comes about, how did he come to that conclusion? Well, I think Jennifer's on the right track. He saw God do the impossible, but not only the impossible, he saw God bring life from that which is dead. And this is an argument that Paul makes in Romans chapter 4. In Romans 4, Paul talks about that Abraham considered his own body at 100 years of age as good as dead. And the womb of his wife, past the age of childbearing, as being dead. So there's your death, right? His body, her womb. And yet what did God do? He brought life from both of those, if I can put it that way, dead bodies, right? And that seems to be, you put all that together, that seems to be exactly what the Hebrew author's talking about. What strong faith to put all that together. And so God doesn't have him kill Isaac, and so he receives him back. And not only that, he talks about him in verse 19 at the very end. He receives him back as a type. So we know that that's one part of the story, that yes, you've got this present story, God testing the faith of Abraham, Abraham passing that test, this whole present story of being willing to sacrifice Isaac, being told not to do it. But that's the one story we know, what? There's more going on than just the present, right? This story means more than just what's happening here. This story is telling us what's going to happen in the future, right? It's a shadow. It's a shadow of Jesus and his sacrifice. Now, what is interesting, go over to verse, let's see if I can find this. Verse 35. Women receive back their dead by resurrection. Well, in a way, you could put Sarah in that list, right? Because she received Isaac back even though there was the command to kill him. And so you have verse 35 kind of related to what we have here. All right, any questions, comments about Abraham? All right, let's go to now some rapid fire ones. Verse 20. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. So, as he looks at Isaac, he's talking about the story where so common, these patriarchs, as they get close to death, as they're on their deathbed, they carry out this tradition where they bring their living sons in, and what do? Yeah, they give a blessing, or maybe even a curse. But the thing about it is that what they talk about, what they state is going to happen to these sons, it actually happens. It's like Isaac becomes a prophet. And so these blessings God carries out as they are actually spoken by the Father. So here the point being is that Isaac blesses Jacob and Esau, and what he says to Esau might be debated as to whether that's really a blessing or much of a curse. But what's he doing? He's telling his sons, here's what's going to happen to you. Here's how God's going to bless you, and specifically, this is what's going to happen. But has Isaac ever seen that happen? No. He's talking about things not yet seen. And that's, again, building on this picture of faith sees the unseen. Verse 21, by faith Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of his son, or each of the sons of Joseph, and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. So as Isaac blessed his sons, Jacob blesses Joseph's sons. And remember that story where he crosses over and Joseph goes, "No, it's this way." He goes, "No, I know, but no, it's this way," right? Again, how does he know there's going to be this reversal of the oldest and the youngest? It's not yet seen, but it's all by faith. It's all God revealing this to them. And that's exactly what happens. All right, then we get to Joseph. By faith, Joseph, verse 22. I meant to keep putting these up here. Sorry about that. All right, so we got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now Joseph, okay? By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel, and he gave orders concerning his bones. Now, I think we remember this story at the end of Genesis before he dies. Does Joseph really say anything about, you guys are all going to be slaves, but don't worry, there's going to be a deliverer, and there's going to be this exodus? Does he really talk about that? No. What part of this does he really talk about? Taking his bones back to Canaan, right? He makes them promise to take his bones back to Canaan. Well, such a promise like that means that Joseph understands at some point they're not going to stay in Egypt, they're going to return to the land of Canaan. But this is spoken at a time where the whole family had moved down to Egypt, right? They had moved down there, but he knows they're returning. And so the Hebrew author interprets that as he's actually talking about the Exodus. And as in the Exodus, one of the things you're going to do is not only get in the land of the Canaanites, but you're going to take my bones and carry them and bury them. And do they do that? Yeah, they do. That's one of the interesting things is they don't bury his bones at the cave of Machpelah, the cave where all the patriarchs are buried. But they bury him, I believe, in I'm trying to think of the other town's name. It's not reaching my brain here. But they bury him in another place, I believe. And so, again, things not seen but spoken even before they happen. All right, now we're going to get to Moses. And Moses gets the most attention. He gets triple billing, kind of, sort of. Because you'll notice the first one, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. So the first one, by faith Moses, really it's not Moses' faith that's being talked about, but whose faith? The parents, right? Anyone, for extra credit, remember the name of mom and dad? Jochebed, very good. And dad's not as easy, right? Hey, Amram, yeah, very good. Amram and Jochebed. And I always laugh at this. No one else laughs at this, but it says, they saw he was a beautiful child. Well, which parent doesn't think their child is beautiful, right? There's got to be more to it in the Hebrew. I just haven't looked that up. But here, they hide him, and with some new information is given that's not given in Exodus. What is that new information? What's that? Okay, yeah, that wasn't really stated before. So yeah, that's new. I wasn't even thinking about that. I was thinking about the one that's right before that. How long do they hide him? For 3 months. I don't think that's in the story of the Exodus, right? So they were able to hide this baby for 3 months and then no more. Now I want you to think about that because Most of our babies in this congregation are older than that now, but imagine how hard that would be when they are under than 3 months, right? You can't tell them to be quiet. Shh, 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 shh. They're hungry, they're going to cry. They're uncomfortable, they're going to cry. But his parents hide him for 3 months, and then, really, there should be more to the story. That whole story about hiding him in a basket in the bulrushes that we talked about, we were talking about God's providence. Incredible story by faith how God returned Moses to his mother Jochebed. All right, verse 24. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasure of sin, considering the approach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. So notice how the author every now and then will break in with their motivation, right? Why are they willing to do that? Because they're looking for something better. And here the better is the reward. He was looking to the reward. And this is really kind of an incredible thing, and one that really relates to our day and time, right? Not that everyone gets to live in a palace of the ruler of a country, right? But everyone can, have that opportunity to make a choice to live for themselves and to live as easy and as much pleasure as you can get out of this life. And Moses could have done that. That would have been an easy choice. I'll just stay in the king's palace. I'll enjoy all that has, the wealth, the riches, the power, the privilege. It'll be an easy life. I'll choose that. But one of the reasons he doesn't is spoken by the author here. He gives up the pleasures of being the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and he calls the pleasures, what's the word he uses? Fleeting, passing, right? The passing, fleeting pleasures. And that's an important phrase in all this, right? When we talk about sin, sin is pleasurable. Sin is easy. Sin brings about a reward in itself, right? That's why it's so difficult, because it does have some payback. It does have some pleasure, some reward, but here's the problem. Why isn't it the reward we should be looking for? Because it's temporal. It's past. Doesn't last. All right. And that's what this chapter is about. They were willing to go through all of this, as he says, he was willing to what? To enjoy. He uses the word enjoy, to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. He considered the reproaches of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. Well, that perspective is only understood when you look at and compare this world to the reward. This is temporal, that is eternal. This is physical, this is spiritual. And there's a lot of people who will not look at this world and its pleasure that way, or they just don't care. I mean, people, as we talked about recently, people are like, I'm going to have to sacrifice this, I'm going to have to sacrifice that, I'm going to have to sacrifice this, it's not worth it. But in that sermon I gave, you have to look at it not just from the outside of the house, you have to look at it from the inside of the house, right? And inside the house, spiritually speaking, it's this beautiful mansion, right? Or in Revelation, this beautiful city where you have these golden streets that are so beautiful, they're like transparent gold, if you've ever seen that type of material, right? It is more than worth it. And I just have a feeling that we have this idea, and I understand this idea. It's one that we have to fight, but it's like, I'm ready to go and be with my Lord. Just not today, right? Just not right now, okay? I've got things I want to do. I want to see my grandchildren, right? But I think when we get to heaven, we're going to be like, why didn't I just want to come here right now? Wow, I just totally missed how great this place is. It doesn't even compare. And that's the way that these men and women looked at it. And so this is something, we're all Moses. And we all make that decision. That we're going to suffer for Christ. Why? Because we're looking for something that pays off in this world? No. We're looking for something that pays off in the life to come. That's spiritual. That is eternal. All right, now the third one is verse 27. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. And maybe he gets 4 here. But notice what was said of his parents now is said of him. They were not afraid of the king's edict, verse 23. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured. All right, I want you to remember that word, verse 27. Moses endured. Why? Because that's where we're getting to. That's chapter 12. It's not enough to have faith. You got to keep that faith. You got to keep that faith going. You got to keep that obedience. You got to keep trusting in the Lord. And Satan's going to, day in and day out, he's going to keep throwing stuff at you. And you got to keep enduring. You got to keep choosing Christ. So we know the story. He has to flee because he's killed this Egyptian and the king wants him gone, and so he flees. But notice the way he puts it. He endured as seeing him who is unseen. As seeing God. And God is unseen. But he acts like, all these people act like they've seen these things. But they haven't. And that's the kind of people we are. We act like we've seen heaven already and we know how great it is, even though we haven't. That's the kind of faith we have. All right, then, by faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. So notice he starts in verse 28 with Moses. He kept the Passover, and then he ends with would not touch them. And obviously he's talking about all of Israel. And so what does he do? He obeys. And what? Well, he obeys just on the warning of God. He hasn't seen God kill all the firstborn, but he believes God. And he hasn't seen blood put on a doorpost, make God pass by and not do what he says he's going to. But they do it all through faithful obedience, as though seeing him who's unseen. Hopefully you see this pattern keep going. Now we go from Moses. Now it seems he's talking about Israel. By faith, they passed through the Red Sea. Notice they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. Now, that's really a neat way to put it, because we know God splits the waters, right? And it's almost the way he writes this, it's almost as if they're passing through the water, right? He says, as if they're going through dry land. Well, we know that there's no water. Might have been a little muddy, I don't know. But they cross over, right? Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 as a type of what? Baptism, right? Type of baptism. And then you have the Egyptian army, and they try to do the same thing, but they're unsuccessful. They have the same action as the Israelites, but they are unsuccessful and they drowned. What's the difference between these two groups? Faith. One is God's people, and one is not. One decides to live as Moses decided to live, and the others do not. Right? The Red Sea is very much, not only a baptism, the Red Sea is very much a judgment. It's John chapter 5. Jesus says, there's an hour coming where all will hear my voice and come out of the tombs. Those who did the good deeds to a resurrection of life, and those who did the wicked deeds to a resurrection of judgment, condemnation. It's not two different judgments, it's two different results. And that's what we see here. So, do we want to cross the Red Sea in a destructive, judgmental, condemning way? Or do we want to do it through an act of obedience like our baptism? And even after baptism, having that endurance. All right, then, we're now in the promised land. We're now in the land of Canaan. Verse 30, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. Now, why is that such a great example of faith? Well, we have right now this whole conflict with Iran. And imagine Trump, all right, Trump's going to do a press conference, and he gets up in that press conference, he says, okay, we're going to stop Iran from having the power to get nuclear weapons. What we're going to do is we're going to have all of our soldiers, we're going to be troops on the ground, and they're going to go through Tehran, and they're going to circle it 7 days. And then Iran's going to just be destroyed. Can you imagine the reporters having a field day with that? That was the battle plan. And again, like Abraham being told to sacrifice his son, you could just imagine Israel go, Joshua, he said, what? We're going to do what 7 times? And then we're just supposed to yell, and the walls are going to come to. But there's nothing like that. It doesn't make any sense. But they do it. And lo and behold, even though they never saw anything like this, it happens. Just as God said it would. And there's a great lesson in that for us is that do we have to understand everything that God wants us to do? To be obedient? To be faithful? No. Do we have to agree with everything that God tells us to do? No. Don't have to agree with it. You just have to do it. Now, our faith is a lot stronger if you will just give it up to God and not disagree with Him, right? But I have no idea why, to have a baptistry, that's a lot of money and a lot of water. Why does God want people to be immersed into water? I may not understand that. But I don't have to understand it to do it or to convince other people to do it. Because that's the will of God. Yeah, go ahead.
Because He said so.
Because He said so. Right? And so, what does that require? It requires of us that humility. God knows more than us. And God says it, that's good enough for me. That will bring my obedience. All right, then we get into, since we're talking about Jericho, we have, by faith, Rahab. And Rahab becomes the second woman mentioned here. Only 2 women mentioned specifically. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. So, what was her act of faith, and why was it such a tremendous act of faith? What did she do? She hid the spies, right? Okay, so she hid some men. Well, why is that such a great act of faith?
She'd have been executed.
She would have been a traitor. She would have been killed. Her family would have been disowned, right? I mean, she put her life on the line. And these were the enemies. These were the spies that came to destroy Jericho, looking to see how they could do it. She was the Benedict Arnold of Jericho. But there was something about her that she said, there's something in power here that's beyond Jericho, beyond the gods of Jericho. And I mean, this is the first battle Israel is fighting. It's not like they've gone through all these cities in Canaan. Now, they have had these victories over the nations to the east, and that's probably what she's drawing from. But through her faith, I want you to think about this. Through her faith, she not only saved herself, who did she save? Her whole family. That's kind of a picture, isn't it? We talk about Christianity is not just about the individual. And I honestly, I think a lot of Christians struggle because they come here to church and they're like, okay, what do you have for me? What am I going to get out of this? And then they go home and that's it. Well, what are you going to get out of this, and what are you going to give to someone else? How are you going to use what you get here and use it to help someone else? And if that component is not part of your Christianity, Christianity is going to not be what it can be, what it should be. And I'll tell you, that's when churches start fighting with themselves. Because we're not spending the time being busy, taking our faith and sharing it with others. And we're using all that energy in very negative ways sometimes. It's a beautiful story that, I mean, you talk about a story that relates and parallels to conversion. Because here she does this act of faith. It's like, hey, I'm going to save you, but what are you going to do for me, right? And they said, listen, when we come destroy it, here's the rules. Here's the plan of salvation. Everybody that's in your house will be saved. If you have a family member that's not in your house, doesn't matter. They have to be in your house. And how are we going to mark that house? How are we going to know this is your house and to save everyone in that house? Do you remember what the sign was? Okay, I heard a whole bunch of things at once.
Red cord?
Yeah, there was this cord that she put outside her window, and that as the American Standard, it's a scarlet or red cord. I mean, think about all the colors that could have been of that cord, and it's the color of blood. Does that sound like another story of salvation? Like the doorpost in the Exodus, right? Exactly. All these shadows of how we're going to be saved by the scarlet blood of Jesus, and that's going to be our saving sign. Everyone that's in the house will be saved. If you're not, you won't be. All right, so we talked about Hebrews being a written sermon, and this is, again, one of those places where I think you start to see that. Because in verse 32, he looks at his watch and he says, "And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell you of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets." So he's kind of like looking at the clock and he's like, oh man, I'm running out of time. What preacher hasn't said that at some point, right? Oh, I'm running out of time. I got so much more material. I'm running out of time. So he like rapid fires now. Look, I wish I had time. I had this all prepared, but I'm going to tell you about what if I had time to tell you about Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and of David and of Samuel. Is there another one? And the prophets. Good. Okay. And these are all that he would talk about, but you can kind of fill in the gaps, right? Now, I want you to look at that list. Okay, this is the analytic exercise. What are some things you notice about that list that stands out to you, that's interesting? I heard someone. Yeah, so now we're jumping into the time of the judges. So we went into the time of Joshua, Jericho, Rahab. Now we're in the time of the judges. So yeah, you have not all the judges, but some of them mentioned there. Anything else interesting? Where's David placed in here? Yeah. And David's a king. He's not a judge, but he's put before Samuel. Really interesting. Why? I don't know. Maybe it's because Samuel was the one that anointed David, and so David actually is king before Samuel comes to an end. That could be. So that was one thing that stood out to me, is that David is the only king mentioned here, and he's put before Samuel. Okay? Anything else that you notice? Who's this Barak guy? Oh, he used to be president. No. Who's a Barak associated with?
Deborah.
Yeah, Deborah. Notice Barak is mentioned, but
He didn't have the faith to do it on his own. He had to have
Deborah go with him. And she's not even listed here. And so, well, he's not listing women. Well, he listed Rahab and Sarah. So that's an interesting thing. Do I have an answer for? I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. And then he just mentions the prophets, not naming them. But that pretty much takes you through the rest of the Old Testament, right? And that's what a preacher does. And I'll finish off with the prophets. And that takes you through the rest of the Old Testament. And so we went from creation to Malachi. So interesting things. Now also, there's some of them that are kind of, this one in particular, right? That does trouble a lot of people. I totally understand that. Because morally, Samson doesn't seem to be an outstanding godly person. But I think one of the answers to that is the authors we talked about before, he's not looking at these men and women as their whole life. He's looking at particular acts of faith. And when you look at it from that standpoint, number one, Samson was able to be an army all by himself against those Philistines who should have been conquered in the days of Joshua. And that took a tremendous amount of faith that he knew he had strength from God to do that. But second to that, couldn't we mention some things about David? Not even just with Bathsheba, but sleeping with another man's wife, and then what does he do with that man? Kills him, murders him. And then there's some other things we could talk about where David almost goes to war on the side of the Philistines against Israel. So, I know there's stories good about David that kind of balance it, but none of these people mentioned are just like perfect individuals, right? And that's the thing. God's looking at our faithful life, our faithful relationship with Him. What about Jephthah? What's his crowning story? He made a rash vow, foolish vow that, depending on who you ask, made him kill his daughter. Some would say, no, something else is going on there. I tend to side with that. You might remember Jason Dickey he killed her. He took that side, but there's a little debate there. But again, some of these individuals there some of their stories a little questionable about their faith. But imagine this. Some of the people in the Bible that lived 700, 800, 900 years, and we're only told one part of their story, one action by them, right? Think about Thomas. There had to be some redeeming qualities about Thomas. He was chosen to be one of the 12, but the story that gets highlighted is he's doubting Thomas, right? How many of us would like our whole life narrowed down to one mistake we made? And that's what happens in the Bible sometimes. And so this author is showing us, yeah, they weren't perfect, but they proved themselves to God by their faith, and not a faith that, oh, God just knew their heart, by a faith that showed itself by its works. Calvinism cannot stand in chapter 11. It just doesn't work. All right, we will start and finish up chapter 11 in verse 33 next week. If we were living in the 1940s, that would not be a good sound. All right. I think most of you have saw the Facebook announcement, but if you hadn't, the sudden passing of Bob Allison's brother up in Kentucky. So they have, of course, been returning there. Hopefully we'll see them next year or when they come back for the winter. But keep them in your prayers. Keep Sue in your prayers. Kathy and Tina as well. Hopefully I'm not forgetting anyone. But a lot of family members passing away at this time, so definitely want to reach out and pray for them. Rodney had his procedure or his, I want to say ultrasound MRI today, and no results yet, but hopefully we'll get some results and some good results soon. For a few moments tonight, I want to read from John, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, and then we're going to look at Revelation 21, both from the same man, but two different writings. John chapter 1, verse 4 and 5, and then I'm going to drop down to verse 9. Of course, John is talking about the Word. He's talking about Jesus. In him was life, and the life was the light, and I'm emphasizing light, was the light of mankind. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not grasp it. We might even say they didn't want to see it. This was the true light that, coming into the world, enlightens every person. Now, in Revelation 21, 22 through 25, John is describing this vision of the great city, the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. And part of that description, he says, I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God, the Almighty, the Lamb, are its temple. And the city has no need of the sun or of the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illuminated it, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light. The kings of earth will bring their glory into it. In the daytime, for there will be no night there, its gates will never be closed. So, no doubt, I'm emphasizing the idea of God, of Jesus, and this light, this wonderful light that illuminates from them. And I'm going to making that very familiar play on words as I ask you this question, when's the last time you've looked at the sun? You know, sun, S-U-N, versus S-O-N. Well, I want to tell you a little story. In this book, in his book, Disappointment with God, Philip Yancey relayed a story by the great scientist Isaac Newton. Through an experiment, or as an experiment, Newton decided to stare at the image of the sun, but reflected in a mirror. The brightness burned into his retina, and he suffered temporary blindness. Even after hiding in the darkness for 3 days, he still saw that bright spot, and it would not fade from his vision. If he had stared a few more minutes longer, Newton might have permanently lost all vision. The writer goes on to say the chemical receptors that govern eyesight cannot withstand the full force of unfiltered sunlight. How many of us remember a time when we were kids? Maybe we could kind of relate to this, where we dared one another to see how long you could stare at the sun. No one did that, right? Foolishly. Well, if you did, it wasn't very long, was it? You can't see and look at the sun straight on like that. So, I want you to think about this. An eye doctor explains why one should never look directly at the sun by giving this analogy. He says, think of a magnifying glass that a child might use to burn holes in a piece of paper. When the rays of the sun focus on a single point, they create a lot of energy. The eye lens is about 4 times as powerful as that of a typical magnifying glass. When you take a lens that is that powerful and point it directly at the sun, it creates energy strong enough to literally burn a hole in one's retina. The power of the sun and its light. Now, of course, we don't really going to be talking about tonight the power of the sun. We're going to talk about a different sun, as you can imagine. I want you to consider God in terms of bright light of the sun. Remember the story where the Apostle Paul extols, or the passage from the Apostle Paul, where he extols the greatness of God. In 1 Timothy 6, 15 and 16, we read, "He who is blessed and only sovereign, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who alone has immortality, who dwells," look at this, "who dwells in unapproachable light, whom no one has ever seen or can see. To him be honor and eternal dominion. Amen." Perhaps as he wrote that, in a way, he might have had on his mind a story of his own life, where in Acts chapter 9, we're told that on his way to Damascus to persecute Christians, he saw a bright light that knocked him off the animal he was riding on, that blinded him for a number of days. With his eyes, he could not see because of that bright light. But because of that bright light, because of what that was, that he saw the sun, he saw Jesus. He saw things more clearly than he ever seen prior to that. Because in looking at the sun, he was able to see that what he was doing to Christ and his Christians was not according to God's will. He could see clearly that he was in sin, that he was fighting against God, not working for him. And more importantly, by looking into the sun, he could see that what these Christians were saying about Jesus was absolutely true. Though he died, he was alive. Though he died on that cross, he was resurrected. And he saw so clearly that from that point on, his life was all about Jesus. Like our theme, he was willing to leave all that he gained in the past behind, consider it to be loss, for the reward of knowing Jesus Christ and his resurrection. And that's the choice that we have made as well. Unfortunately, there are many people who don't want to look at the sun, S-O-N, who don't want to be enlightened, who don't want the righteousness of Jesus to shine upon their life. But that's the reason why God sent Jesus to us. To take that which was unapproachable, that which was unseen, to give us in the flesh the view of God as we've never seen God, to get as close to God as any man could get. And then to become for us that light from the sun that gave his life, that we could go to him, be forgiven, and to serve him with that wonderful salvation. So there's a great parallel when we talk about looking into the bright sun, S-U-N, that can blind us. But when we look at the bright light of the sun, S-O-N, that will help us to see more clearly than we've ever seen. And may we never close our eyes to that ray of sunlight. If you need to come to that sun, if you need that salvation, if we can help you in any way tonight, won't you let that be known as together we stand and as we sing. There's a fountain free just for you and me. Let us sing so ways to the free. It's a fount of love from the source above.
dear Heavenly Father, we come to you in prayer. Thank you for another day that you have given us. Thank you again for another midweek. We can gather as your children and open our Bibles and study another portion of the Word. Father, we are grateful for our lesson here this evening of the heroes of faith, Father, and pray that you continue to be with us each day. Help us continue to grow stronger in the faith, Father. Father, we ask that you be with our elders here as they labor here, or that you continue to guide them and give them the wisdom they need to keep us on that road that leads home. Father, we're about to part and go our separate ways. We ask you to be with those that have lost loved ones here the last few days, Father, Sister Kathy and Sue and Tina and Brother Bob, Father. We ask that you be with them. Help them remember the good times, Father, these sad times in their life, Father. Go with us always. Forgive us and do wrong. In Christ's name we